My name is Julian Levens. I work for Time in Amsterdam. I've been doing that for 9 years. My background and job is in mainframe, so that was not my everyday work, so it makes it more interesting. I tend to work with COBOL, EasyTree, JCL, and sometimes IBM mainframe assembler. I do a lot of work with Rex as a script language in the mainframe. I tend to find myself drawn to improving the tools and infrastructure we have using Rex. Another infrastructure thing I got involved in at the company is FOSWiki, which runs under Windows. The previous employer had Twiki, so when I came to the new one, I'm looking for a wiki, and FOSWiki is a fork of Twiki anyway. And crucially, this is where the Perl bit comes in. FOSWiki runs with Perl. We've currently got to upgrade FOSWiki from version 1.08 to 2.02, I think it is. And even world changes. 9 years ago, they wouldn't let me get anywhere near Linux. Now I'm allowed to install the next version of Linux. No, too quick. Okay, as I mentioned above, I'm drawn to infrastructure, so even though I'm working on FOSWiki, I found myself looking at various infrastructure things. Software configuration management, release management, dependencies, so on and so forth. As it currently stands, FOSWiki is not too bad. We've got Git, product tracking on FOSWiki itself. We have a lot of testing things, that's fine. We don't have continuous integration. The other point here is we've got nearly 600 extensions on GitHub. About 360 are actually live, the rest in a somewhat poor state. But even the ones that on the main website need a little bit of cleanup at a fairly cosmetic level in terms of what we present on the web. We've been working on trying to improve the build process using Vagrant and creating lots of VMs. Eventually with different configurations and testing different configurations doing that. I've been doing lots of work, therefore, grabbing all the extensions, all the core code, scanning it, and for historical reasons, I tend to work on Windows. I'm moving inexorably, I think, toward Linux, but I'll still start with the Windows editor that I like. And I know that learning this is not only 5 minutes. So, and we do have people who use FOSWiki on Windows. So, for various reasons, if I come to this point, we've got the tools, we use symlinks. This is really what this is all about, this talk. But Windows historically didn't have symlinks, then they got added, but they haven't been added to Perl, and it's becoming a pain for me to work without symlinks. So I thought, how can I fix that? First thing to bear in mind is that with Win2K, they added something called junctions. They're not really symlinks, and they're only for directories. Okay. From Windows Vista onwards, Microsoft actually decided they're going to add POSIX compliant symlinks. So we've actually had symlinks in Windows for some time. People didn't seem to know about it, and it wasn't that easy to use. One of the things that makes it difficult is you need to do some fancy administrative stuff to let yourself actually create them. But once you've got the authority, they do work pretty much as you'd expect them to. When I'm looking at what we've got on CPAN, it's Win32 symlink. It was circa 2004. Which means these reported junctions, which aren't really symlinks, and they don't work on files, they work on directories. So this is a step in the right direction, but it's still not complete at all. Administrative access won't mention that here, it is something you have to deal with. And forced install, just note that I did have problems installing it. I think that's a Windows issue. Windows do hardly, or both of these require a tagging all the way. Add a compile error. I think it's just the difference in the compile that we use. I have to change it. Put brackets around the expression, but to compile. And that actually works fine. It's a simple problem. Okay? I did try something later, try some bizarre thing. If you can have some code where you're going to go use this and this, and you install the same code on Linux, you want it to work. So even if it just does nothing, becomes a no operation on Linux, you still want it to work. I wanted to show a few things here. Okay. So Windows gives you make link. J is for junction. So it created a junction. Particularly exciting, there it is. And you can see it's created telling you what its junction is connecting to. And it pretty much works like a directory does. You can go dir. And indeed that's the same as if I go dir lib, which connects to. Same thing. I can also go make link, junction, and we'll just happily let you create a junction to that file. And that's one of the positives for me, is that it actually lets you create something that then doesn't understand. There we go. Now, same thing. Now we do a symlink. You don't need a switch of any sort for just a normal link. Okay, we now have a symlink there. So just created, pointed to lib. Yeah, that would still not work. I'll get rid of that, sorry. So I'm connecting to a directory, you have to actually tell it. You want to connect to a directory rather than Linux, you just tell it, connect to this, and know if it's connecting to a directory or file and adjusting accordingly. You might have made a mistake, but again, it's not smart if you start trying to create a symlink directory to a file, or vice versa, it seems to let you do it. Okay. So, yeah, just clean that up. Okay, I've got it cleaned up. Then we get to the actual Perl tools that do the same thing. So I've got to very short script. Picks up the symlink and hard link we've got on CPAN. In theory, it's going to create a junction, one to a file, so that's to a directory, that's to a file, and there's actually a hard link, and that works fine. But these are completely broken. This slash question mark lib slash when it comes from doesn't work. So I'm a bit baffled by what's down CPAN. It seems to be partly working, but not quite. Okay. Back to the way ahead. I did have a very basic Perl version, pure Perl version, which just uses backticks, coordinating in here, and sort of to do things. Of course, there are matrix issues with that, and I can't do anything about this. There are ways to grab the main subroutines of Perl and overwrite them, do what you like, but it's not very easy with the file test operators. So you need to use XS. And having gone down this route, I wanted to do it right. I really wanted to make it generic, be seamless, so it just put it in a script, automatically under Windows or Linux, the script should work. I haven't done any XS before, so this is jumping in a bit. But a new C, remember reading in best practices that you should use inline C, so I thought, okay, let's have a look. And the first bit, I just started with the easy bits, was the basic symlink code. And it's come very the code that I saw in the libraries on CPAN had to look quite a lot of work, but now this has become part of the Windows API. So what I have to do is quite small. There's a little bit of matching Perl that does a little bit of marshalling of the strings for Unicode reasons. It has to convert to UTF-LE, UTF-16-LE. So it's not, this isn't too complicated. I found this quite straightforward. However, then we move on to doing read link, which is a bit more involved. We get down to the code here. There's a struct here. Tried to look around and find it. Found it wasn't in the, since this is the Strawberry Perl, it's doing the compiling, so it's not in its headers. So this is quite a bit of work to work through all the attributes, Google around on, and find things. I actually found some Python code that did this, so I was able to mix some of the important bits that I had missing. And that is what you need to do to read back your link. Okay. Now, lstat and stat. Assuming I started work on this, I'd need to replace lstat. I'm going to cover all the things necessary to get symlinks working. I'm going to make sure that all the parts of Perl that deal with links would be dealt with, and that would include lstat. So it's something that I'd replace lstat. When I did testing on Windows, as it says here, Windows does not follow the link for things like getting stats. In practice, I had to modify stat. Lstat was fine as it stood. Give it symlink, connect with symlink and give results, things what you want. But stat would also just read the symlink. So that wasn't too difficult. I just pick up my read link code, pick up the link, and then put the stats and what we picked up. Again, it's not too difficult. In fact, that was basically done a little bit of Perl. Here's the stat. So it's not very complicated, it's a little, again, bit of code to deal with doing some conversions. Later in the code, I've got a begin and end block that grabs the course stack, so I've got to still call that in some circumstances. So if I read a link successfully, it is a link therefore, then decode what you're given, otherwise just call the course stat on the new file. So that gets stat working. It's not very complicated. Of course, all that was relatively straightforward. Now I'm starting to get into the excess things that, certainly for me, sounds difficult. I'm changing an opcode. So there's this code beginning a block like this in the C. I now know this stands for push pop, which I was baffled by for a long time. Because obviously the Perl interpreter is stack based. So I checked the various docs, Perl XS, Perl guts, Perl API, Perl crawl. Well, that made it quite easy to deal with function calls, accessing data, but I was struggling to find clearly what the state was the Perl stack state would be when I arrived, how to grab the stack, how to talk to the stack. Because some of the information was there, but it's little details about exactly the state in this type of code that I might have to deal with in certain ways. It could be, I did say I struggled to find this information. I went to v5px, I got a few pointers. There's a book we've recommended by a few people. It's quite old. Looks like a good book. So I was able to download that and look at that. But still a struggle. I'll come back to that in a minute. One of the reasons, of course, I'm struggling to find information is partly me. I've got a job to do. I didn't want to become an expert in XS at this point in time. I didn't want to read everything, so I sort of tried to find what I needed. But I forced myself to dig in a bit more. And with these pointers as well, I got code that was mostly working. But not quite. This code at the minute is the broken version, so I'm going to run that. There's a set of stats at the bottom to prove the stats and how that works. But higher up, you see, because my handling of the stack isn't right, instead of going empty text, not a symlink, it goes empty text, empty text. And I was baffled by this sometimes, because this is obviously one of the difficulties when you're talking to Perl, dealing with the stack. You've got your own C stack, you've got to talk properly, and make sure you don't mess things up, and I was baffled with this for some time. And part of the problem with that was that the original code, find that, no. I've lost it. I've lost it.
We'll start with BP underscore.
Yeah, I spotted that, thank you. Looks very innocuous at first. I thought this thing expands, it's a macro which could call the functions, doing quite a lot of work in there. So how's that looking around in the stack state? What have I got to do with that? How do I keep track of what's going on? Convince myself I can probably ignore it, it's probably leaving it in a reasonable state. This is more or less what I'm replacing. I've got to call these things again, what stack state are these guys in. So first I tried pretty much leaving this roughly as it was. I didn't need the undev case. I get my result. I had to pop it off the stacks and do it differently. But I was getting the artifacts to work with others for the result. So to help myself make it easier, went back to the code, so I can unroll some of these macros. and this is now also, of course, reading the relevant documentation. You grab the stack pointer, the global stack pointer into your function. Some of you may, of course, know some of this much better than I do. I want the top parameter, the SV, for the name of the file. Call that, if that, whatever that magic is doing, it will just return, do what it has to do. So I can pretty much ignore that. Again, this is fairly standard stuff, but again, for me, this was all new. So, starting, describe the document as more or less emptying, entering a new scope. Again, you're doing work with the stack, calling, sorry, not calling, this is making a copy of the parameter because I'm now calling my own in Perl. Finish on the work off here. I have to take the original parameter, push it on the stack, call my subroutine, and then get back the stack pointer, and this is get the value back. What I didn't have, this is where this artifact comes in, one final thing. I'm mucking back the stack here, reducing and bringing things down, because I don't put it back in the global stack when you come into these functions. The first thing it does very much is this DSP, which is going to take my local stack and override it with the current global stack. That's all the work I've done to bring this off, it's completely wasted, and I've still got the SV still on the stack, which is where we get the artifact. So we'll take this out. So it's now got inline C going and compiling the change C code. You can already see where this is a symlink with a symlink. Now I've got the stat work right. Everything looks cool. Now, I don't want to go through all this, you can read it if you're really interested, but it is working. You can pretty much see a code alpha link, symlink, so it is a symlink, not a symlink, and so on. So I know that is now working, doing pretty much mostly what I want it to do. Because you can just, inside the code, you're just going at the top, okay, I'm playing around with grammar, the basics of that, and then everything else just works. Link, symlink, relink, link test, and lstat work as expected. So as I'm going to be doing, picking up code that runs in Linux, and it's orange in Linux, just add that to the top of the code, and I'll get all my links working properly. There are complications, there always are. There are issues about the compatibility going back to earlier versions of Windows, compatibility on Perl. I don't know how far back this sort of excess code will compile or work with older versions of Perl. I don't know all the issues with using older versions of Windows. As I said, this particular capability came in Vista, so it's 2006 onwards. So I'm reasonably safe with that. But certainly the issues I'm thinking about to make better support are considering going back with Windows. But also how would this possibly at some point work with, Perl eventually doesn't make this standard. How do I quietly do nothing? And it isn't that simple, because one of the things that you get with Windows is very long names. This is actually from, been moved around with all this. There we go. The Windows NT, you can add this on the front of your path and get paths of up to, it tells you there, but it's 32,000 or so characters. Linux is limited to 4. K is the maximum path, but again it's the compatibility issue at the moment. The default in Windows will be about 260 characters. But if I start doing this by default, but I find I have problems with compatibility with older versions of Windows. So I'm looking at options on the when you go use and to do links to go standard, which would not do this, and then so not VLN for very long name for that. Again, if you wanted to be seamless, you just want to say that's the global setting and do it. But as you go forward in time, or run backwards in time, this is supported, you may have issues. So you've got to give the user some sort of shots with that. And again, that's the same sort of problem you can see happening with Perl in general. Other things to get right. One thing of actually a little bit of interest for anybody who does need to work with Windows. One little thing I discovered to make some of this work properly, very small thing. There's a small sub 2 here. And it's just when doing the encoding, I'm talking to Windows. Perl, before talking to Windows, will add a null. But this is going to a double byte character, so I added another null, but it didn't work. So it's talking to Windows APK, you might find these other nulls you want to when you're passing Perls around. Okay. Other possible issues, well, you tell me. I mean, I'm trying to think of things in Perl that might deal with links. I did come across file stat, and that's a cool module. It's stat. It may just work. I just don't know, I haven't tested it yet. But it's something to consider about. Let's basically, I'm done. I mean, there are some conclusions for them. I did feel that E9C didn't make it easy. The documentation for excess and the guts of Perl are pretty good, pretty extensive. Of course, they could be incomplete. I was rushing through them. It just seemed to be gaps to me, but I was rushing through them. The real hard work I've got now, because although I've got that tested and the basics are working, it's all the other bits and pieces that are going to do the hard work to really think about what I've got to test, how to make it seamless, some of those options that I might need to consider the future, the past, and to try to make sure that whatever happens, I don't break, things don't break. So one idea, one of the reasons for the options, and also potentially, as I've got here, is I provide options to change subs. So I insulate myself completely from it. I'll deal with the links, you provide me some subs for dealing with the files coming in and out, so that's not my problem anymore. And all the issues of compatibility stop being something I have to worry about too much. Yeah, I'm still going to deal with consistent error handling. It's really just that sort of thing about seamlessness. You know, error handling, documentation. If it's seamless, there shouldn't be much documentation required, apart from some of these sorts of things to control special cases. Of course, thorough testing, documentation. So I've probably done about 10% of the work so far, but okay. So that's what I've been doing. It's been quite a bit of fun for me because it's my work. I don't go anywhere near this sort of stuff, so it's been good for me. Does anybody have any things in? Anybody use Windows much and deal with symlinks? Think of things?
Yeah, well, actually, I tried to do more or less the same thing as you did a while ago.
Yeah.
And then the best solution I found was using shutting out to mklink,
Right.
which required admin permissions.
Yeah.
And I'm actually not sure if I got it, because on the first slide or something you said something about admin permissions.
Yeah.
You still need admin permissions.
We still need
for
admin
your solution
permissions,
as
yeah.
well.
I've got a
But your
thing.
code actually doesn't check if the user has admin permissions, right?
No, you simply get a failure from
Yeah.
Perl when I call Perl, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it might be nicer or something if it actually says, well, you're not an admin user or something when it dies or when
Yeah,
it's
that would be good,
done.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, and also, do you have your module on GitHub already?
Yeah,
or
it's my name is Julian Levens. My GitHub is
And this is, I think, the bad thing, right? So Windows now has the symlinks, but it's more or less only for admins, which means in ideal world you actually would like to have the symlink function in Perl. Create the symlinks for you, but if it only works if Perl runs as admin, that's not a really
you don't have to be
viable
admin.
option.
No, sorry. What you can do is you can do group policy. I'm not a Windows admin, there's a single group policy or local policy. And then you create a group that has authority to create symlinks.
Yeah, but it's
Then
still...
it's still there's an admin step, but it's not.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an administrator.
Mhm.
You just have to be in a group that's allowed to create symlinks.
Yeah,
So it's not, you're not giving God authority to somebody. You're saying we need this development team, say, to be able to create symlinks on the machine,
yeah.
and then you put them in the group.
Yeah, which makes it, I think, still more viable for like setup scripts, such as you're setting up your wiki
Yeah.
software, and not really for everyday use or something like that, probably, right? And it probably prevents having the symlink function in core Perl from doing this by default, right?
I don't know. My feeling is you could provide it in Perl and activate it because you use. Well, the thing is, if you don't activate it, if you don't have it, then it just doesn't work anyway. Even now, it doesn't work because it's.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing is, you would have the -s function to see if a file is a symlink, and it also doesn't work, right? Currently on Windows, if you say -s and you provide it the
-L. Give me -S or -L?
-s would be the size, right? I always have to look it up in the main page.
Minus S size, minus L is
Yes,
selling.
for sure. So -L doesn't work, and this also would be really nice if it actually works. To have it portable and working on all platforms in a similar fashion.
Yeah. Well, that is the goal, and that's the point there. So I'm going to find. So there's the. Okay. So, yeah, so there's GitHub, Levens, Win32 for links, so just give those ones the two covers. Yes?
So, I just learned the other day about underbar for stat in Perl, where it's like caches the results of the previous one.
Yeah.
Will this just work with
I
that?
have to test that.
Does it use the outcode?
Because, I mean, I can't be actually doing with testing on this, but but I believe it does, because that try magic F test I think is partly to do with that, and also if you look at some of the code, again, this is some pieces I am way on. You see that this loop here, this while loop, which I think is basically grabbing the next one if it's a set connected together, which may also be connected to this underscore, but I'm not quite sure, but I do need to test that. Anybody else? Okay? Thank you.